Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So inshallah, starting this week at Middle Ground, we're excited to offer the beginning of 2 new classes. And one of them will be the reading of the book of Iman, or the book of faith, from the well-known and universally accepted hadith collection known as Sahih Muslim. And I thought I would share a little something from it, even though we'll be reading from the book of Iman, or the book of faith. I wanted to actually read a selection from the book of Zakah, or the book about purifying one's wealth. And normally when we have these considerations for the purification of wealth, we will often think about 401ks, different types of stock investments, and so on. What is our zakat due upon? And so those are the normal considerations. MashaAllah, you should check out Sheikh Joe Bradford. He has an incredible website. He also has a great book called Simple Zakah Guide that we include actually in our new Muslim care package. We give one, we put one in there. Fantastic book written in a worksheet style, so that if you want to know how to calculate your zakah, that would be a great resource. But actually what I would like to share today is something a little bit different. And that is not so much about those kinds of considerations, but generally about the attitude, you could say the attitude towards employment and the attitude towards work in general from a Muslim perspective. So this is a commentary on Imam Muslim's hadith collection by Imam An-Nawawi, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy on him. The very, very famous scholar that many of you will be more familiar with in his work, Al-Arba'in, sometimes just simply called the 40 or the 40 hadith. Imam An-Nawawi was a very, very famous scholar who lived a fairly short life, but was extremely productive in his life. And so he gives a commentary on Sahih Muslim, which is quite a voluminous collection of hadith, not quite as massive as Sahih al-Bukhari, but still extremely large. And so he gives a really great commentary itself, somewhat of a redaction of Qadi Iyad's work. But here I want us to actually look at, it's not incidental how our scholars in their approach to whatever the topic is, whether we're talking about tafsir, commentary on the Quran, whether we're talking about biography of the Prophet ﷺ, in this case, whether we're talking about sayings or collected observations of what the Prophet ﷺ, what he did, the way that scholars would arrange the books themselves, right? Just the tabawib, right? Just simply the chapter titles themselves are quite insightful. We're going to be talking about, 1, begging. This is something we see quite frequently happen, and some of us aren't sure, how do you deal with that? The Quran, for instance, says the one who comes and asks, don't be harsh with them. And we have other other ayat in the Quran, other verses in the Quran that, for instance, extol the merit of being generous to the poor, right? Al-Masakin wa ibn al-Sabil wal fuqara, right? People who are in different states or different methods of arriving at being poor, that without a doubt, one of the major characteristics of Islam is haya, and is humility. And part of that is to have empathy for your fellow man and to aid them when they are in a position of difficulty. And so that should be said and understood first and foremost. That being said, though, what's interesting is that this hadith, which many of us will be familiar with, and I'll read it for you in just a second. What's interesting is that we would perhaps not expect to find this particular statement of the Prophet ﷺ to be located in this particular chapter, which is about what? The Kitabu Zakah, the book about purification of wealth, and particularly under the bab of what? Babun Nahi Anil Mas'ala. The bab of the prohibition for asking. Here the meaning of Mas'ala means what? The prohibition against begging. So we're talking about purification of wealth, and this particular hadith is situated under the subheading about the prohibition against begging. And by here, prohibition, he's saying that the Prophet himself, alayhi salawatu wassalam, may Allah bless him, prohibited blameworthy begging, which is not the same for a person that might have a need, right? And even if there is a need, Imam An-Nawawi here points out ثلاث شروط, 3 very important conditions if it were to be done, to ask a person how that would be fulfilled. So let's read the hadith. I want to read the hadith to you straight off, because many of you go, oh yes, of course, I know this hadith, but then we must now reconsider it in its chapter heading, and why did Imam Muslim, why did he put it there? This particular observation begins with an observation on, so this hadith begins with Umar giving a kind of exposition and encouraging the people to fear Allah. So it begins with فَإِنَّ عُمْرَ كَانَ يُخِيفُ النَّاسِ, telling the people, be fearful of Allah Azza wa Jal, and then continues with سَمِعْتُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَهُوَ يَقُولُ, in which the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam stated, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, whomever Allah intends or wants good for, then Allah will give that individual comprehension of the deen. There's a couple reasons why I'm mentioning this hadith. One, as I said, we're going to read from the book of Iman from Sahih Muslim, inshallah, beginning this weekend. The other class that we're also going to begin this weekend is an intro to Maliki fiqh, or an intro into the methods of worship. How do you worship Allah and perform the various acts of worship? This hadith is also collected and narrated in a slightly different way, also from Imam Malik, may Allah be pleased with him, in his collection. And so that we're going to begin the study of fiqh this weekend, and we're going to also look into the inner aspects of faith this weekend. We will now see all these things are interconnected. And so he states that the Prophet ﷺ said what? Whomever Allah intends good for, that He will give that person, He will give he or she what? Comprehension, يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. He will give them comprehension of the religion. So then now let's take this back and analyze that. Again, this is located in the book of the Purification of Wealth, في كتاب الزكاة عند الباب, right, in terms of the subchapter heading about what? النهي عن المسألة, on the prohibition against begging. So whenever Allah wants a good for a person, He will give them comprehension of the religion. And part of comprehending the religion will apply to this prohibition on begging. And so Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he says what? مقصود الباب وأحاديثه النهي عن السؤال. So he says what? The goal or the objective of these ahadith that are around this topic as it relates to the prohibition against begging, he says what? وَاتَّفَقَ الْعُلَمَاءُ عَلَيْهِ إِذْ لَمْ يَكُنْ ضُرُورًا, and that the scholars have come to a unanimous consensus in agreement that it is not permissible except in which there is, the word he uses, durura. Now, durura does not simply mean that you have a need. Like right now, I could use more money. Who couldn't use more money? And so that is not what durura means. It means a person that's like in a kind of in a state of emergency, right? In a state of emergency that a person needs to acquire that to fulfill some type of great need, not a want, or to fulfill a right. And so, he continues by saying what? وَاخْتَلَفَ أَصْحَابُنَا فِي مَسْأَلَةِ الْقَادِرِ عَلَى الْكَسَبِ عَلَى وَجْهَيْنِ. There has been, he acknowledges, there has been some difference of opinion amongst the latter-day scholars in terms of, is it a black or white issue? Is begging haram, black or white? Or as it relates to fiha shurut, or are there perhaps some conditions to it? Of which he says there's essentially, right, 2 major ways of looking at it. He says what? He says, وَأَصَحُهُمَا, the most sound of them, إِنَّهَا حَرَامٌ لِظَاهِرِ الْأَحَادِيثِ. The most sound opinion is that on its face, at face value, yes, one cannot beg, right? Again, unless there is an emergency need. وَالثَّانِي حَلَالٌ مَعَ الْكَرَاهَةِ بِثَلَاثِ شُرُوطٍ. And then the second, weaker opinion is that it is permissible, even though it still carries with it the stigma and it carries with it the characteristic of being disliked and detestable. And most importantly, even if it were to be allowed, then it says what? بِثَلَاثِ شُرُوطٍ. It has 3 important conditions. And so I'll list those here because this is important. Again, all within comprehension of the deen. Whomever Allah wants good for, He gives them comprehension of the deen. That the Prophet ﷺ forbade unnecessary begging, and so on. So he continues by saying, the first of, and la yadilla nafsa. First off, the beggar cannot be the kind of person that they humiliate themselves in the process of their begging. So falling out on the street, purposely being disheveled, not cleaning themselves up, that you should not embarrass or humiliate yourself. You should have a sense of dignity. And this is very important because it's about the sa'il wal mas'ul, right? The issue as it relates to begging and the prohibition therein is important because it wants to establish a sense of dignity that if you are in a sense of need, you still are what? وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah has ennobled the human being, and so regardless of your financial or economic situation, you still are a person that you should have a sense of dignity and worth, and that you should not, through that, abase yourself and humiliate yourself simply because you have a need. He says, continuing, وَلَا يَلِحَ فِي السُّؤَالِ. And then also, a person, if they do have that durura, if they do have that legitimate need, that they should not do so, A, persistently, and B, kind of incessantly to impose themselves. And I'm going to give a little bit of my own anecdotal kind of comment on this in just a second. And then finally, the third, he says, وَلَا يُؤْذَى الْمَسْئُولِ. And most importantly, no harm or hardship should be visited upon the one that it's being asked of to give. He says, فَإِنْ فَقَدَ أَحَدَ هَذِهِ الشُّرُوطِ. And that if even one of these conditions, and again, this is of the second opinion that is not as strong, but we can allow it potentially to happen as long as there's three conditions. Even if one of those conditions is violated, he says, فَهِيَ haram. Then it is not permissible. And again, he says, what? بِالْإِتِّفَاقِ. That it is also in agreement of the scholars. So amongst the ulama of somewhat latter day, they differed that either it's not permissible, or if it is, it's disliked, but it has these three conditions. However, that if those conditions cannot be met, then they all essentially circle back around to muttafiq. They all circle back around and they come to complete agreement that it's not permissible. Wallahu alam, as he finishes. So the reason why I say this is that, certainly probably one of the least liked aspects of my job as imam is that people will come to me because I'm an imam and then will ask me as a proxy to go before other people in the community that they feel are wealthy or they perceive them to be wealthy. And they will ask me, hey, can you ask so-and-so for this or that? And unfortunately, many of these other people are also let's say they're frequent flyers or frequent offenders in doing so. It tends to be a lot of the same people. And so it's really unfortunate that we don't place also an equal emphasis in our community. This should be part of the tarbiyah. This should be part of the religious instruction that we give young people, that you should seek out a job. You should, seek to make a good living as much as Allah Ta'ala will facilitate for you. You should go out and attempt to earn that. And that if you find yourself in a situation where things have been made very difficult for you, then have a sense of dignity. One, don't humiliate yourself. Trust in Allah and have some sabr that He will take you through this. Two, if you do, be discreet about it, right? Be discreet in your asking of people and do not make it a hardship upon people. Don't come and try to, ask me to go ask somebody, because I suppose the logic or the theory is that if you ask me as imam and I go ask that person, they would be more inclined to give because now it's coming from a religious authority, versus if you were to deal with them individually, they might say, nah, man, I'm not going to help you or give you. But if I come and ask you, it's kind of like a crowbar, proverbially that you could use. So as I said, in general in Islam, we are a religion of generosity. And of course, the reason why we even pay our zakat, the reason why we purify our wealth, that wealth then is redistributed to those who do have legitimate means. We are a community of rahmah and shafaqah. We are indeed a community of mercy and compassion, but we are also a community of people that don't put burdens and hardships on other people, that we do as much as we can to seek a good kind of living, and that it is part of one's comprehension, right? A good sign people will often ask, how do I know if I'm close to Allah, or this, or these kinds of questions. And so look at your attitude about your life. If you feel that you should just sit in the masjid all day long and study and not go out and get a job, or that because people have been blessed by Allah to have more wealth, an abundance of more wealth than what you have, that somehow that they have an obligation specifically to give you that particular money, or to come and ask people that you feel that they would have as a kind of like intercession a better chance of getting them to fulfill that request, then you don't have a good comprehension of the religion. And it says, وَمَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ, right? For whomever Allah wants good for, خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ, He gives them a good understanding of the deen. Again, this hadith is situated in the chapter of zakah, underneath the subheading about the prohibition against begging. So these are some of the things, inshallah, we're excited as we start a new chapter in our educational endeavor at Middle Ground, to get us to really to look at scholarship and to appreciate it and to reevaluate it in our times, to increase our ta'zeem, our appreciation of Islam, and of course to increase our taqwa and our khawf and our khashya, our fear and our reverence of Allah, and to make us people who are followers of the sunnah and the uswa of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi ta'ala wasallam. So we look forward to seeing you inshallah this weekend, starting in the morning after Fajr, July 1st, and these two new classes, both the reading of Sahih Muslim and also the intro to Ibadah, the Maliki fiqh course. These will be the first 2 Saturdays of every month. So there will be roughly 2 Saturdays on, or 2 weekends off and 2 weekends off. We hope to see you there. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.